Good morning. What is great, good, and real? I think I titled the session wrong today, but it's too late. I let it go into the universe. I can edit it after. It is day 23 of the Do You Rules live experience, where we're on a self improvement journey towards 1,000 hours. At least I am, and that's what keeps me motivated. So I'll keep doing it. I'm feeling very random today. So I just sort of wanted to talk about the randomness of life. Before I do that and try to settle myself, let me get right into the material check. My pen just fell. We have the red book, red book, red book. As much as I love myself, I hate myself sometimes. We have chapstick check, half consumed water bottle check. I forgot this. 423. What time is it? It's 4:23 a.m. and I am feeling very random. I question these days, the random days. They're not so much emotionally built around my hands are cold. Around sort of not knowing or not feeling like it. But I find this odd truth to life as I continue to experience life in the way that I'm experiencing life, which makes me really deeply question what exactly am I experiencing with life? But I came to this realization that if we want to avoid stagnation and stasis and inertia and all the things that keep us paralyzed and make life even more perplexing and difficult and arduous than it already is, then we build routines. And I've talked about this and I'll continue to talk about this until I get the sense that it's no longer worth talking about. Rhythms and patterns and routines. So if you can consider that day 23 of coming on here to expose myself in this way, what do I believe is the benefit at minimum? Well, if we believe we should improve, and we talked about 1% better, we've talked about so many things already here. I can't even remember all the things we've talked about. But the premise, being virtuous, being ethical, being predictable, being routined, specific habits and patterns, consciousness, God, intentionality, the path you're walking, being inspired, being motivated, being focused, accepting that we have flaws and weaknesses and that we could be in rhythms and habits and patterns that are feeding us stability that are built off instability. Imagine that we could be in a state where the chemical cocktail that is our brain and how the neurology works as far as what it feeds us with dopamine and cortisol and everything that keeps us sustained, that what that is could be a concoction of being stably unstable or unstably stable. Because whatever it is you're doing and whatever it is and wherever it is you're at, however it is you're at, without judgment, that's you, right? We talked about that too many times. Who are you and what does it mean to be you? And I believe of significance, of great significance, the self improvement experience and the journey and the ability for us to sort of investigate and navigate, explore and expose, go through the emotional pendulum of life is important in that it does provide purpose. It does provide meaning. And without any of those things, we're left to question what is this all for, right? And certainly I thought about that today. What am I doing and what is this for? Less who am I and what do I mean or what does it mean to be me? And more what am I doing? What am I getting? What does it all mean? And what if it meant what if it meant nothing? What if all this means absolutely nothing? And then I start to try to define, well, what would it mean to mean nothing? How could it mean nothing? What if it doesn't mean anything? And the proverbial legacy thoughts of life flow through my head. And it's sort of like if you were to vanquish off the face of the earth, who would care? And then does that matter? Does it matter? Does it really matter that if I was to just vanish today, that it would probably not mean that much to that many people? Is it of significance and any less significant if it meant something to 3 people or it meant something to 3 million people? Is there really that much of a significance around the factors that make all of this worth it? Whether the scale is really small or the scale is really large, whether the success is defined as having a really small radius or it's all encompassing and somehow all infinite at the level of God. Who would really know anyway? Who would care anyway? What does it all mean? And even if you made an impact to life and God and universe and the reality of this experience to the most grandest of possibilities that you could with your life. Like if you were presented with 2 options for life, the option where you made the smallest possible impact, and maybe if you're like me, it's just your wife and your 2 children, which sometimes I question what the impact is there because you have to question it. It's not always all good. It's not always all good. But in the same way, you need those not goods to realize what's good. But you're presented. Here you are, Cliche Jeff, or whomever you are watching, wherever you're watching. You have an option. I guess this is the red pill, blue pill, whatever it is moment. But let's just think about it. You can have a life that I guess somehow, if it meant something, it would mean something this way. And then you have one where it can mean something this way. And define it. Again, you could impact 2 people, 2 billion people. In the grand scheme of what it all means, what does it all mean? And how long will it be impactful? And I start to consider this, and you go into the literature and the text of people who have made massive impact in life through their contributions to life. And like with anything else, the further and more distance that's put between where that person stopped existing and stopped impacting to where the world is today, it dilutes. And some of it sure gets grander from the perspective of the sacrifice that the person may have made with their life, for their life, whenever it came to zero and stopped meaning anything in the virtual reality. Maybe it wasn't appreciated in that moment, and then left to really consider and ponder. Like that is the great truth of all mystics and philosophers and believers and impactors at scale, is that a lot of times as the impact is happening, the people who are actually experiencing it in the moment aren't receiving the full benefit of what it really means to experience it in the moment. And it isn't until that person is gone and eviscerated, right? And sent into the great unknown, and time gives it a little more space where you can consider and think and ponder, that you're like, wow, this person, can you believe what this person did? But then in the same way, there's sort of this finite window of, well, once the people who were around to experience this great person, when they go, and history does what history does, which is put time and distance in between us. It's not that it's demeaned or diminished. It's just that the reality of life is this: the world keeps going, and it's gonna keep going. And the more distance that's put between wherever you end and wherever the world is at relative to time, you're gonna be more or less significant. And maybe not. Maybe you become Jesus Christ. That's that. That would be like the ultimate impact. And even still, I question, with all the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, apparently, based on what the book says and some of the literature, depending on what you believe, imagine what that experience was like, that he could be as accepted of who he is today and all the gloriousness that apparently is he, because apparently maybe he's the only son of God, depending on who you read and believe and what you watch and follow. But it took for him to be crucified. Which means what? What were those people thinking that he was impacting in the moment of impact? As he was producing all these great, there are mysteries, healings, all these miracles. The miracles made him, at least apparently according to literature, right, dangerous. And so he was dangerous until he was no longer dangerous. And then after he became no longer dangerous because it was impactful to people in a way that they couldn't quite understand, so they crucified him. Then you realize it was possibly maybe a mistake. And then all these years later, there's a massive following. But now, even all these years later, I question if you do follow. I read something that was sent to me. No matter of fact, let me see if I can pull it up, because I want to read it verbatim. We're talking about the randomness of life. We're talking about the randomness of life. We're talking about the randomness of life. And, I guess right now, what does it all mean? What does it all mean? It's hard to get in shape spiritually if you only work out on Sundays. I could go into a massive rant about that and why I stopped following the way that I follow. But then I believe, can reason that if you were only taught to practice a certain way, then you just carry over that faith. And at minimum, if it's once a week, it's better than 0 times a week. Right? Because there's a reality to the compound effect. If you did something every Sunday for an hour, in the grand scheme of things, I would argue, damn, at least give it an hour a day. But I would hope that you come together in this place every Sunday, but you take that Sunday place with you Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. I don't know that it quite goes that way, because again, I look around at the world and I start to question, which is why I say, I had this conversation with someone near and dear to me yesterday. I am so, and I've said this on the show a bunch of times already, I am so less into what people are saying, because a lot of times it contradicts who they are actually being. And if what you are saying is in direct contrast and in great contrast to who you're actually being, I don't really want you exposed to me in my life. Why? Because I can fall victim to that. And I've been a victim of that. I've been a victim of, I'm not quite who I say I am. And then you start to question, why do I do that? Well, it's because I'm trying to satisfy the demand of whatever life is putting in front of me, because there's this randomness to it. There's a random, who do I need to be right now? What do I need to be? It's almost like that to me is the greatest distraction of instant gratification, is I gotta be who I need to be in this moment to satisfy this moment. And so while we gotta be in the moment, I caution you to not sacrifice the moment for other moments. Don't be in this moment who you would not want to be in future moments. And so in that way, if you can stay in the moment and understand what the moment really means to you, then you don't have to sacrifice ever any moment for future moments, because everything's already in the moment. You understand what I'm saying? It's deep that way, but it's also simplistic. And I'll get into some of what, I read yesterday that I think is powerful, as far as acquiescing, falling victim to the moment and the randomness of life. But to close the loop on the Sunday thing, and I say this with all due respect, At some point, I'm sure the story of Christ had a more significant impact on the virtuousness, if you would, on the ethic, and on the lifestyle of the moment, the closer it was and the further we detached from the moment, right? So there's a mass, you sacrifice, it's a significant impact for a certain amount of time, but the more that time stretches out, the impact diminishes and fades. Why? Because the human behavior would tell you when there's no one left around in the universe who possibly could have experienced what that magnificent change was, it dilutes it because no one actually lived it. Now you're just kind of sort of telling it. And the more you tell it, like with anything else, it gets watered down because you can tell me whatever I want. I said this to my children yesterday. It's your life. I could tell you whatever I want, but really you got to experience it. And the best way you could possibly experience it really through me is to watch. What I say is what I say, but really what I do is everything. But in that way, they won't know until they actually do. However, and back to the point, I can't explain to this generation, or I can explain to this generation what the impact of my generation was. But if you didn't experience my generation with me, you can appreciate it. But because it's removed and there's a distance between it, it doesn't have the same impact. That's just the way life works. And in that randomness way, we can start to feel ourselves diluted. It goes back to the question of what does it really mean anyway? What does it mean? Let me set a timer. Set a timer for 5 a.m. 20 minutes and 22 seconds. It is... I feel great today, day 23. God bless everybody. God bless the world. It is a much warmer 11 degrees today. It was about -6 yesterday. And I'm going to be cold or outside in the cold in the next 25 minutes or so. Because once I stop recording and streaming here, I'll with great intensity and passion go walk upstairs to lace up my shoes, to put on my gloves and my hat. I'll do that slowly. Although I can't avoid it. Once I'm outside, I'm outside. But anyway. Life can mean whatever it needs to mean to us. The improvement process can mean whatever it means to us. But there's a reality between time, generations, and the randomness of life that stretches out our significance and our impact, at least emotionally, through our spiritual experience and certainly our external existential, that word comes out so much better in my head, view of life. Because there's a randomness too to the reality that there are generational gaps. And what I was driving at before I talk about the moment again, and I was reading something about Cicero, who apparently was one of the greatest philosophers and teachers and understandings of Stoic behavior, yet didn't practice it. And why that's significant, I'll get to it. But let's consider that we're on this self-improvement journey, and I can show you that 23 days in, I'm up at 3:30. I'm on the mic by 4:30, sometimes by 4:15. I go pound out the pavement between 5 and 5:05 because I go for my run or I jump my rope. I come back and maybe I do some more scripting, or maybe I start lifting. I get my children prepared for school. I can have another hour. All those things, right? All those things. There's less randomness to that. And you want to limit the randomness because the less random life is, as far as what you can control, then the more emotionally stable you are. However, and in the same way, you can be emotionally stable by being unstable because you're used to the frenetic pace. We talked about this. And in this way, life presents a very manic, in-your-face, rushed life that we continue to react to, and then we continue to wonder why we're so stably unstable. It's because you can't stay still for too long. You can't be predictable for long enough. You can't be prepared for the randomness of life because, okay, if you're too random and you're meeting random with random, you get more random. A positive and a positive always gives you a positive. How is random positive? It's not necessarily that it's positive, but in the way that you can create an equation, if I give random to random, I'm going to get more random. If I meet random with predictable, unpredictability with predictability, then I can present myself as a predictable routine against unpredictable randomness. Right? So in that way, if I can only control what I can control, when the uncontrollables hit me, I'm in a controlled state of mind. I'm in a controlled state of being. I'm emotionally balanced towards a centeredness of being controlled. That's what self-improvement to me is all about. And the reality of bringing yourself to a state of total, because the world is totally random. Life is massively random, yet predictable. In that if you do start to understand and believe energy and consciousness, and like I always talk about God in search of God, you'll have a magnetic pull and force into what you want to attract for your life. And I believe you'll attract everything. But in that way, too, you stick a magnet out. Sometimes something's going to come back to you didn't necessarily want. And then sometimes when it's on that magnet, to get it off, you gotta really pull it off, right? So you brace yourself for the reality that I'm bringing predictability, I'm bringing stability, I'm bringing centeredness and patience and consistency and discipline. And life is just not going to care sometimes. And when it doesn't care and it brings you a randomness, one, you could consider it a test. Two, you can consider it the math of, well, it can't always be perfect because if it wasn't, you wouldn't know any different. There's just that reality. If it was always gravy, everybody would do it. And if everybody did it, it wouldn't be what it was, right? And if it was always the same way, I would argue, based on what I believe, you're in heaven already. So you would have nothing to worry about. But you have something to worry about because life is one big worry, which is why if you are addressing worry with worry, well, then you get more worriness. Worriedness? Random. When you become disciplined around typical rhythms and patterns and behaviors, and you set your routine to be more predictable, then at least you can worry less. But in the same way, it's not going to stop the pervasiveness of randomness in life because that's the way it is. And then in that same way, although I go through the experience and I have the same framework on a day by day basis, and I'm very predictable on where I'm going to be, I could feel very different today than I felt tomorrow. And that within itself creates randomness. And no matter how much centeredness I build around a level of patience, around all the derivatives of love, because I love myself to the fullest extent possible, there's a truth to I'm going to be randomly emotional. And sometimes I'm aware of what makes me randomly emotional. Like I told you that this week brought about a lot of distractions. And sometimes distractions are fruitful, positive distractions, but nonetheless, they are distractions. And any deviation from your typical standard rhythm and pattern, like, hey, I do this every day, I do this every day, but now today's asking you for something different. Well, when you produce output towards something different, you sort of, and you can't really do it in an indifferent way. There's this philosophy too around when some of the measures to try to be successful in life are put together, be indifferent. I, I don't know that I want to be indifferent because then I believe you lose the emotional experience. But then in the same way, you can be indifferent to the fact that whether I'm high or low, I got to do it. You see what I'm saying about the randomness and the paradoxical nature and paradoxical complexities of life, that you can almost always be experiencing the both sides of the coin. It's never, you don't get a coin with heads and heads or tails and tails. It's heads and tails, right? And some days you flip, and maybe most days you flip to heads, but then you get that tails. What do? Well, you do what you always do, but it's harder to do it. Yeah, but you still got to do it, right? I'm about to sneeze. Hold on. How's that for random? Can you decide when you want to sneeze? And you might laugh at these things. You might laugh at these things, but when you start to really get in tune with your body and with its workings and its autonomy, because it's an automatic system that you don't have to really focus on, it just does its thing. My wife said to me yesterday, think about the power in this statement that I never would have thought of. I'm gonna have to sneeze in another second here too. But because of the randomness of life and because I was asked to perform different sort of functions, but in the same way be stable and balanced and in my routine, I went through 2 birthdays in a row. 2 birthdays mean birthday cake after birthday cake. You're like, what's the big deal with that? Well, generally speaking, my diet is 90% clean. I have a cheat day, and I might have a cheat meal, or I go listen. I indulge, but certainly I've overindulged. And what she said to me yesterday was, "Yo, I think you're. I don't even think you realize how tired you look and are acting and what you're saying, and it could be because you've been eating unclean for the last 2 days." Think about that, right? Hold on. Rhythms and patterns and rhythms and patterns and rhythms and patterns and randomness. Rhythms and patterns and rhythms and patterns and rhythms and now I'm stumbling, tongue twisted. All right. So think about that last comment, right? Predictably unpredictable, stably unstable, randomly unrandom. I don't know. It's early. What am I saying now? All right, time check. We got about just turned 4:50. Now we have 9 minutes and 58 seconds left. At least I think. I do want to get out there. Life's random. Life is random. Life is random, but you cannot randomly approach life. Life is random, but you cannot randomly. We cannot. You can. Actually, you can. You can. I would suggest, and based on my experience, is that when you randomly approach the randomness of life, I said it, random and random is going to equal more random. So you want to be predictable in that way. Now, to the literature that I read, when we make decisions in the moment, we have to be cautious of how that moment defines and is defined by the preceding and then the subsequent moments, right? Because moments are fleeting. It's happening. It's happening. It's happening. It's happening. It's happening. And because it's happening and happening and happening, we live in this manic, frenetic, intense pace. We can lose sight of what that moment to moment decision means and the impact it has. And when you really start to consider that there's a randomness that's not so random, there's a magnetic pull that sometimes, you attract things because some things are in your way. Think of it like that. So God's in search of itself. You're this big magnet. You're attracting everything you want because you're this wonderful, massively impactful human that's going to change all 8 billion lives. And as you're pulling, right, and you got that magnet out, you're like, oh, you're holding on to it. And you're like, money, 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 big house, mad cars, and all that beautiful body without doing much work because I deserve it because I'm God's child. So you, oh, I love my life. So you're pulling and you're pulling and oh, give me everything I want because I'm amazing. Like the world has a whole bunch of things in the way. So you might be trying to pull all that money in that house and that car, but there's something in the way of it. And that something in the way of it could be a lot of pain, a massive obstacle, a crazy villain that is just there. Because how else would you appreciate what you receive in life. And then in that way, when you just pull and you just keep doing everything every day, and we talked about not expecting any results, the reward feels random. You're like, oh, I'm gonna do all these things because it's gonna make me $1 million. I'm gonna do all these things because it's gonna get me a dream house. I'm gonna do all these things. I'm gonna get my dream body. I'm gonna do all these things. I'm gonna get my dream relationship, the business, the degree, all those things, right? And then when you stop focusing so intently on that, when you stop and let it go and detach, boom, it happens, and it feels random. Oh shit, I did it. That's how it's supposed to feel, because you're never going to know when it's going to happen. And until you release it, you can't get it. But in the same way, you got to stay locked in on it. You see what I'm talking about with the randomness of random? All right. So Cicero, who apparently is this great mind, and I don't want to say revered, apparently. I think I should do more research. I just have one point of reference for as far as how they depicted the impact of Cicero to philosophy and Stoicism, and the reality that he was sort of a genius and a master around being able to articulate. Think about this. Think about this for our lives. It is why I talk about scientism. It is why I get very uncomfortable with folks who are knowledge chasers through paper and not actual experience. I've talked about this ad nauseum. It is one of my greatest fears, to believe that I know what I think I know, but I haven't really applied it. It goes back to that applied knowledge. You're telling me and giving me all the advice you think I should take, but it's clear you follow none of it. I have no time for people like that. You should do this. You should do this. You should do this. But I look at you like, what are you doing? And maybe you consider that arrogant. But I can't consider you wiser than me, or that I'm going to just you're going to bestow upon me all this grand and beautiful advice on how to be great. And I'm looking at you like you've applied none of it. That's hypocritical to me. And in the same way, you don't have to speak much. You just show. Right? But also, tell me what you're thinking, right? You see how this works? Am I losing my mind yet at 4:55 in the morning on day 23? Cicero. Cicero could write the book on Stoicism, apparently. He can give you language that is so subtly complex and yet in the same way revealingly beautiful. Cicero was even referred to apparently by Shakespeare, right? What was the problem with Cicero? He didn't live it, apparently, from what I read. So he was the greatest philosopher, the greatest mind, accrued all this power, was influential to the point where he gained enough authority and power to sentence you to death because he felt like it. And you might think, like, when I really reflect on these things, you're thinking about like 57 BC or 100 BC. This is a long time ago. We've come a long way. We've become very much more civilized. Thank God. But if you can consider that the predictable randomness, now I went from randomly random to predictably random, would say that if you were to accrue all this power, also be careful what you ask for, and you ascend into your ivory tower and get this seat, you'll have all this authority. And what do you do with your authority? You randomly sentence people to death. Now, you can't do that in today's world, at least not in America, where I'm from. But at least, and in not literal terms, but you can certainly hurt someone and have an impact in their life that is detrimental to them forever with your words and with your actions and the randomness you of the experience of life that you give someone. But in that way, Cicero would look at the moment for what it was worth to him and make a random decision or predictable decision that was random in that, all right, we're on a path, we're going this way. This is our moral compass is sending us this way. But now you're in front of this person, so our moral compass sends us this way. Then you go back in front of this person, so our moral compass sends us that way. Then that way, then that way, and then that way. So all your decision-making processes are not so much random, but they're conflicting. And when you live conflicted decisions and you execute through the application of how you live, not what you write, not what you say, not what you put a front on, but what you actually are executing on, when you start to execute it through random patterns, or at least through patterns that are conflicting and are opposed in a way, you get random results in a very predictable way, in that what you are and what you're living is no longer predictable, and so therefore you're not really who you say you are. And if you're not really who you say you are, then what does it all mean? Tie it back to that. And so if at minimum, we can't determine what it's going to all mean, we can't really define what it's going to all mean. But certainly, if you're not saying or doing what you say, you don't mean what you say, it means nothing. That is for sure. That is for sure. And then in the same way, I could argue and debate then, for it to mean something, we must always be aligned with what we say, because then we're always, at least relatively thinking and reasonably thinking, aligned with what we are thinking, which is relatively or relative and reasonable to then think we're aligned with what we're feeling. And I'm not even suggesting that what you're feeling and then thinking and then saying and then doing and the identity you're building is conducive to positive results, because going back to how I talk about robbing a bank, you might feel like, think like, speak like, and then devise a plan to rob a bank. But I say it this way. If that's your intention and you say you're going to do it and you do it, go be the best bank robber. It sounds terrible, but strip away the morality. Just come to it's 5 o'clock. I got to get out there. I got to get out there. Hype myself up. You could do it. You could do it. You could do it. You could. Ooh. It already is a great day. But I would argue that at least the bank robber did what he said, or she said, or they said they were going to do. And they didn't pretend. Well, I guess there's some pretending. You don't tell everybody you're a bank robber, I guess. But I said this to my children. We actually passed someone who was homeless. And immediately the compassion and the empathy, my children, oh man, do you have any dollars? Can we give this person anything? I feel so bad. I feel so terrible. So I asked them this. I said, it's great that you empathize and have compassion. And yes, let's help this person. I said, but let's take one of your teachers who is teaching you about life because you go to school to learn. If that teacher is not a teacher because they intended to go be a teacher, and you say to yourself, how could you not intend to go be a teacher? You got to go get a specific degree for that. You got to have a special set of skills. Yeah, but if you're a teacher because your mother's father's sister's brother's father's grandfather's great-granduncle was a teacher, so you're a teacher, do you really want to be a teacher? And if the answer is, well, I want to be a teacher because it has great benefits and it give me a sense of accomplishment because, teachers generally are successful, then you're not successful because that's not really who you want to be. Now, if you defaulted into that because you had nothing else to do, again, I would argue, what's your level of success? You just kind of acquiesce to, life is hard and difficult, I'll be a teacher. Randomly? How good of a teacher are you going to be? And then apply that to any phase. Most of us are doing that today. I'm working in IT. I didn't wake up and say, I'm going to be an IT worker when I grow up. As great as it's been great. It's been great. But this is why I'm making a pivot. This is why I believe I'm at where I'm at right now. I had to learn that I could, yes, maximize being a teacher. If you already did it, you might as well. But I would argue then because you didn't really want to be a teacher, you're not that great at being a teacher. So then you have limits to how great you can be as a teacher because that's not really where you want to be. Now, give me a second. If you're doing something with your life, that's random, in my opinion. That's random because you believe this defines success, but you don't believe it defines success because it doesn't define success for you. It defines success for someone else and the way society's going to treat you. And I'm a teacher. You should fuck off, right? I think that's the first curse I've dropped today. I've been on for 40 minutes and 33 seconds, and I think that's the first curse I dropped today. I'm getting better. I'm getting better. Ooh. All right. Homeless man. If that person, I'm just asking a question. If there's a teacher who didn't really want to be a teacher and was forced into being a teacher and is now responsible for teaching, think about think about that with great depth and respect for what it means to teach. Now I question, what are you teaching? But this homeless person said, I tried the 9 to 5. It wasn't for me. I don't like the idea of paying taxes. I think that what they do with the tax money in America is terrible, or wherever you're at. I think that the way people manage people and the type of experience I had in the 9 to 5, it's like it's essentially become enslaved to the standard of rush, 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 follow this schedule because you told me to, get paid every 2 weeks. I'm not jiving with none of that. I'd rather be homeless. I'd rather be homeless and do what I got to do, figure out a way to move on and get by, because I feel better about that and my contributions to, I'm minding my business. I'm minding my business. I'm not in anybody's way. I'm not creating conflict. I'm just doing my own thing. Is that person less successful than the teacher? Because the teacher gets a paycheck every 2 weeks and gets benefits? What defines success? To me, if you're doing what you said you're going to do, and you do what you say you do, and you're about what you say you are, because then you're about what you think and about what you feel. There's a randomness to that is much more predictable. So if you're going to ask me, what does it all mean? I thought about today, what does it all mean? I don't know the answer to what it all means for you. That's why the Do You rules is so significant to me for us. I do me. I do me. The way I do me, because what I do for me makes me me. And when I think about how I do me, I feel there's a sense of closure within myself, a sense of peace that I don't have to think about it too much because I already know what I'm about. Yes, there's some days where I question. Yes, there's some days that are harder. All those things you want to hear. All those things you want to hear to influence, I'm going through this and this. Yeah. So is everybody else. That's why I'm hesitant. But I also, right, the paradoxical nature. Some people are going through things that are crazy. And I empathize and I hate to say I feel sorry because who am I to feel sorry? But, and I try to understand and appreciate the emotion behind it, right? We struggle. And the truth is, some of the struggles are deeper. Some of them you got to look at yourself and be like, come on, man. Most of it, like I said yesterday, it's your fault. You got yourself here. You just did. And yes, it could be worse. I digress for fear of not making a salient point and losing sight of what my intention really was. It is what it is, and all the other cliches. It's already complex. I don't know what it means, but it can mean something if you decide that it should mean something. And the only way to make it mean something is to do you how you want to do you, right? Change your mind, change your life. I am who I say I am, baby. Ooh, do you and stay rich.